I'm editor-in-chief of Welt am Sonntag, Germany's largest Sunday newspaper, and I'm thrilled to have all of you here. We're going to talk about what business can expect from Brussels. And luckily, we have three groups of representatives up here, one of which is entrepreneurs, two very famous entrepreneurs, by the way. We have two commissioners from the European Commission, and we have two public servants, one of which, Mr. Bartenstein, being a minister from Austria, which is holding the presidency right now. So we have an actual president sitting here right with us. Now, the way we would like to proceed is have a panel discussion up here and then pass the microphone and the debate to the floor so you can participate. And we want to start off asking entrepreneurs what they are expecting of Brussels, what can be improved, but also what they can do to help Brussels work. I think there wouldn't be much use in trying to divide between politics and business. It's probably much better also stressing on what business can do to make things better. Now, I would like to pass the word to Clara Gaymard. For one reason, you might know her agency, Invest in France. It's one of the most successful investment agencies in Europe. You might have seen the posters, the big posters hanging in Davos, and advertisement in many newspapers and magazines. She has, with her team, achieved something quite remarkable. She has attracted, 20 or 30% more investments to France, 30% more investments to France by just putting good arguments on the table and trying to convince people not by hollow phrases, but rather by arguments. And starting off with you, what do you think that business can do for Brussels and can ask of Brussels? You don't have to push anything.
Okay, thank you very much. First, what I want to say is that it is the right question. And when I was asked to be president of Invest in France Agency, I proposed to the Prime Minister to gather a strategic council with 21 international CEOs. And we have 2 German, we have 5 American, 5 Japanese, one from England and from different countries. And we thought it was the best way to put on the table the right subject. So the Prime Minister received them every year, and in a 4-hour, very informal discussion, he has the information on how they see the world going, what are the strategy for their own company, and what they want to see changing in France. So afterwards, during all the year, we have worked with their representative in France and go on all the subjects. So when you speak to the CEO in one-to-one meeting, what I do every day, especially in Davos, thanks to Davos, but I'm traveling more than 50% of my time to have a one-to-one meeting with international CEOs. You see that the main question they have is how can we first attract the best talent? And I would say that the question for Brussels is first, which policy can we drive to attract the best students, to attract the best researchers, to attract the best managers in Europe? It is a key issue because, of course, we have to go in India, we have to go to China, but you have also to attract those talents, as the United States has been able to do in many years. The second question is the question of innovation. What are the policy we can drive, fiscal policy, but also policy of clusters, policy of gathering the best universities, the best, at the European level I'm speaking, the best private and public center of research, the best company working on the technology of the future. So, that is the second question. And the third question is the question of the regulation. And of course, we are speaking a lot about the question of the labor laws, and I would say France is not number one on that matter, even if we are trying to make a progress, and the Prime Minister is really dealing with that matter today. But it is also the matter of how we can drive the youth to the right studies and so on. So it's not only a question of labor laws, but it's also a question of regulation. It's also a question of security. So I would say those 3 items, and I would add a fourth one, which I think is very important for Brussels, is the question of the demography. what will be the future of Europe if we don't have any more babies, if we don't give the capability to the woman to manage the personal life and familial life with the business. We see that in the country where it is impossible, they don't have any babies anymore. So concerning the business that I'm meeting every day, I think those 4 questions are the key issues for Brussels.
Well, thank you. This is quite an input. We have here with us Sir Martin Sorrell, one of the most, I might say, famous entrepreneurs in Europe, having built up and constructed WPP, one of the largest communication networks in the world. And you are virtually very global. You operate in 106 countries. You have 84,000 people working in 2,000 offices worldwide. What would you expect and ask of Brussels?
Flattery will get you everywhere, Chris.
Yes.
And I should say in an era of Sarbanes-Oxley that we have a business relationship with Clara through one of our agencies, Ogilvy, who we're delighted has been doing the Invest in France campaign, and I think it's been fairly successful at many levels. So I asked Christophe to ask you to go first on the basis that you were one of our clients. The downside of that is you've said everything that I wanted to say. So I'm just going to sort of follow you in what you've said. But let me just say before I go on to some specifics that our people at our number of our companies have given me to say to the commissioners and government officials, that at its heart this issue is a very important strategic issue. The things we're going to talk about in terms of specifics, in my view, are merely tactics. The strategic issue here is that if you said to me, and just following up on Christophe's point, what am I worried about from WPP's point of view today geographically, not functionally, that would be new technology. Geographically, I'm worried about, in my view, the inability of Western Europe and Western European governments in particular to respond to the competitive issue that we face. We probably have exhausted ourselves at Davos this year and indeed in previous years on the growth and development of China and India and its significance, which is it's the most important geographical development. But it's not just China and India. There are other tigers that are developing in Asia, such as Pakistan. Bangladesh will come, Indonesia will come, Vietnam, with 80 million people, is really in its 2.0. It started to grow 10 years or so ago, sort of lapsed a bit, but it's coming very hard again too. And it's not just Asia, it's Latin America as well. Latin America is not just Mexico, Argentina, and Brazil, it's more than that. And it's not just Latin America, it's Africa and the Middle East. We are seeing very great strength in the Middle East. The miracle surrounding Libya, the political miracle surrounding Libya, will result in significant economic strength in North Africa, and that will become increasingly important. And I just remind you of I don't know whether it's an apocryphal story, but when Kim Il-jung was in Shanghai a few days ago, he went round an American car manufacturing plant. And he is reputed to have turned to one of his advisors and said, we should have one of these in North Korea. All the boundaries to competition and the obstacles to free trade are coming down. That is the biggest single driver of our business. So the strategic issue here is how does Western Europe remain competitive? It is rather, in my view, Western Europe is rather like an aging, mature company. It's very big. We have 5 economies, around $2 trillion. In Asia, you have Japan, you have China, and South Korea, but the rest of them, India is about 780 billion. It's big size here. It's difficult to make it grow. And as Clara said, there are big issues, just like big companies have. There's the healthcare issue. There's the aging demographic issue. There's the pension issue. And unless we deal with these issues, I think Western Europe is in danger of becoming a backwater. Having said that, it's not solely the responsibility of government. It is a partnership. And the agenda here is a partnership between the private sector and the government sector. So that's the background. I just want to cover 6 issues that we feel in WPP, the constituent companies feel that operate in this area feel are very significant. The first is the liberalization of the energy markets. That's one issue. The second is the implementation of the services directive in Europe. That's the harmonization of services and policy on services across Europe. The third is delivering on productivity gains. There is a view, and this is contested by some, that Europe's record on delivering productivity gains is not as good as the US and may not be as good as we're seeing elsewhere in the world. The fourth point, and Clara has mentioned this already, is the inflexibility in the labor markets. I remember one of the participants here, a major participant here in Davos, coming to one of our board meetings, I won't say who it was, had just done a major deal, a major acquisition, and came to our board and had to secure $200 million of synergies. I remember he said. This was a company in America. He said he could not have secured those synergies here in Europe. So if we want to encourage investment in this country, in Western Europe, we have to have a more flexible labour market policy. And I would say in the UK that we are slipping backwards. All the gains, not all the gains, many of the gains that we saw under Thatcher in particular, under Prime Minister Thatcher, and beyond that, are being eroded. The role of the government in the UK in terms of percentage of GNP is rising, government employment is rising, and I think it's a serious issue. As the French move, or say they are moving more towards the Anglo model, I'm a bit worried about the Anglo model going back to where maybe the French were before Thierry Breton and everybody else. Sorry? Thank God for that. Fifth point is, again, Clara's mentioned this, encouraging innovation, research and development, and supporting new enterprises. There is a parallel to how do you compete on new technologies if you're in a traditional business. You will only do that if you innovate, and I think you have to brand as well, but I'm biased, if you innovate. So encouraging innovation, research and development, and supporting new enterprises is critical. And finally, let me call it bureaucracy, the red tape. And just let me quote directly from one of my colleagues' point of view. At its simplest, there remain too many examples, and this is extreme, of ill-conceived, drafted, or badly transposed legislation that lays unnecessary burdens or additional costs on business. Whilst there is already much consultation, it needs to become much more meaningful.
Thank you. You touched about every base of politics that is done in Brussels, almost everything, and this shows the magnitude of what we're talking about. Now, I would pass the word on to Mr. Gros-Pietro, who is running Autostrade in Italy. He is running streets and charging people for using it, and you're probably one of the biggest real estate owners in Italy, I suppose. What's your view?
Well, if we stick to the toll roads, of course, this is an industry where the PPP is the main instrument that is raising private capital from the market to build structures and infrastructures, to finance them, to operate them, assuring a public service. So the first request that we have to do, not only to the European authorities, but also to the national ones, is to say exactly what they want. Because to assure a public service, you have to know which is the service that the collectivity needs. And that means that you have to build consensus at the national level, at the supranational level, at the local level. The main difficulty is that usually you have a great design at the European level, that is, for instance, the TEN network, and then when you pass to build it, you have opposition at the level of the municipalities, and the national government has difficulties to maneuver between the engagements that they have taken at the European level and the difficulties that they face at the local level. But I think that this is only a piece of the construction that we have to do. And I would like to to start from what the private system and the enterprises in their collectivity have to do for the European construction. We have made Europe because we thought of a single market, of an economy which should be the same size or even a larger size than the United States. So we need that this economy has the right size of the enterprises and the right products, European enterprises with European products. Here is the difficulty, because these enterprises have to change their products, have to make research, have to make innovation, as has been said. But to do that, they need from one side talents and knowledge, and this is an area which is not in condition to produce so many talents and so much knowledge as the United States. So here is a need of policy. And on the other side, we have not yet the size of the companies. Maybe we can talk more about that, but I will put an example. We have been told as consumers that the European Commission has given rules about the size of vegetables that can be traded in Europe. But when we go to the airport, we see on the shelf the electric adapters for plugs and outlets. And if you travel throughout Europe, you have to bring with you at least 4 of them. So it seems that the European construction is not yet completed, and it is not yet at the same level in different fields.
Well, thank you. I think this is a very wide field you just opened here, the outlet problem. And I read a story about it once, why this was the best way to do it. Mr. Bartenstein, first of all, I'm really glad that you're covering 2 topics in your ministry. You're covering economics and labor, a thing that my country has just chosen to split up. There are 2 ministers in Germany now for that. There was 1 before, so you're responsible for both. What do you make out of it?
Well, now during the 6-month EU presidency, as much as possible. I mean, in Germany, very clearly this was a political decision to redivide that Ministry for Economy and Labor that had been apart for many, many decades, and it was together under my dear colleague Wolfgang Clement, and now it's been divided again after the elections. But that's not the decisive factor, really. I mean, first of all, let's make it very clear that only parts of the issues can be handled by Brussels. Much has to be handled by member states. 25 we've got now. And therefore, to say the Lisbon process, which works or should work on European competitiveness with very little success for the first 5 years, I would say 5 years of rhetorics, of diagnosis. That is now a process involving national strategies from 25 member states. And just this week, President Barroso has introduced the Commission's report on that. And it will be a very important part of the Spring Council, which will be devoted to European competition. So let's face it, it's partly Brussels, but it's partly Paris, London, and other capitals. Second, researchers' talents to react to what has been said. And I'm sure the commissioners will add their input to that later on. Frattini, the Commission, has made an interesting proposal on a so-called green card, European green card for talents. I think that's the right way. And we'll see, of course, not all of Europe is English-speaking. That's a clear advantage of the US to Indian talents, for instance. But I think we will become more attractive than we have been in the past. Even in France, you can now live by talking English, and I think that's real progress we've made there. Innovation. There, I mean, I see a clear correlation between country success stories and the GDP input for R&D. If you look at those countries being successful, US, Japan, Scandinavia, some European countries, I would add Austria to that, they're above average. and those who are less successful are a little bit below average. So the primary obligation, recommendation of the Commission, self-commitment of member states will have to be during the Spring Council to really head for the 3% target, which was defined in Lisbon, 3% of GDP in all 25 European Union member states. Liberalization, well, here it's mainly member states who put an obstacle. I mean, it's not been the Commission who's been trying to block the liberalization of the services market. The Services Directive has not been blocked by the Commission. The proposal has been not the one I would have liked it to be, but I'm sure that Charles McCreevy, along with Monsieur Barroso and peut-être Monsieur Verheugen, they will react very quickly upon the first reading of Parliament in middle of February, and then it will be our task to try to get political agreement on this important Services Directive 50 years after it should have happened, to realize the European domestic market for services. We don't have it. The Koch report, which was written in advance of the midterm review, indicates that transborder business with services has not increased but has decreased over the last years, and that's a pretty dramatic signal. Inability to respond, China and India growth rate, of course, I mean, we are at the start of a year where we can say we expect increasing growth rates, not only in Germany, which is the biggest economy of Europe, and therefore European success is closely linked to German success, no doubt about that. Michael Kroes said he would expect up to 2%. I think the European Union will go for maybe more than 2% this year. Unemployment rate is clearly too high, 18.4 million, but we are on the way downwards, at least that. But that has a lot to do what Martin Sorel has said. I mean, it's an aging, it's a maturing society. We need a lot of reshuffling, but we can't just say top-down. We have to go a bottom-up strategy. We have to include stakeholders, and by that I want to stop. We have to include social partners. I'm coming from a country which has a very good tradition of including social partners, by the way, Germany, Finland also. And I see a chance now, having talked with Parliament, having talked with business leaders, Monsieur de Sellier, but also with John Monks and union leaders, that all stakeholders in Europe now know that those 5 years of rhetorics and diagnosis have to be over, and that we are now going into 5 years of therapy. It is possible, and if you show European employees that you don't want to put away social security, that you don't want to put away their rights, but that you want to include them into the process, that it will be for their advantage, that it will create the jobs, it will make jobs more secure. If you're able to introduce a system which we call flexicurity, increased flexibility to the benefit of Europe, but increased security for the benefit of the individual. We should in the future not protect or not try to protect the jobs, because business leaders know you can't do that. We should protect the individual, the employee, and that's a strategy which will help to get much more consensus into European decision making than in the years which we have behind us, I hope.
Commissioner Kroes, you are in charge of competition within the Commission. And I would like to ask you two questions. You have just said that Brussels is not responsible for everything, and Martin Sorel has listed 6 points: energy, productivity, labor, research and development, bureaucracy and services. What do you feel responsible for? What should one expect from Brussels? And second question would be, you being the Lisbon Commissioner, are you expecting 5 years of implementation now, as he has just said, after 5 years of debate?
Let me start with saying that I highly appreciate the openness and the honesty of the Austrian presidency. For indeed, it's not only the task for the Commission but it's correct to mention. Anyhow, I highly appreciate, for that is not by you, but sometimes done, that the card is just put at the other side of the table. And let's stop to blame the other one for it, we badly need a successful solution for what we are facing. For I completely agree that time is not our friend in solving the problem. We have to deliver, and we, that is as well the member states, as well Brussels, to put it that way. That's not the answer on your question, but just a start. By the way, there are a couple of items in which we are, of course, absolutely the number one as a Commission to put the policy at the table. And rightly mentioned by you, the energy policy. And I think when people are doubting if the Commission, if the College is doing the job, and if it's really worthwhile, what's the added value of the Commission, to put it in a one-liner. I am absolutely sure that the energy policy, but also policy to attack terrorism, also the policy for liberalization of the climate in Europe for the business world, that you badly need a combination, but anyhow conducted via Brussels. Talking about the energy policy, and we have already a couple of sectors in which we can prove that liberalization did make sense. And that is what the European people want to know. What is in for me? Well, we can show with, for example, the air policy, the liberalization of the 90s, that it made sense, and that you and everyone can see it at the ticket. The same with the telephone, the telecommunication tariffs. Also with the energy. Still we have our doubts if the energy policy, if the energy sector, the liberalization has worked out in the way that we really did expect at that time. Therefore, Piebalgs, Andries Piebalgs, the Commissioner for Energy, in close cooperation with me, he is developing the policy again and in a phase in which it really makes sense. And I, as competition commissioner, did start an inquiry for the energy. The first preliminary results of that inquiry are at the table, and to be quite open and honest to you, I feel very embarrassed. It isn't working out as we had expected. There are a couple of items in which we have to explain that that's not acceptable and that has to be changed. So with those results, we will come with a package in which, for example, the transparency of the prices, the transparency of the markets, the fertile sector situation, the not working of the cross-border situation, indeed not liberalized as we expected. The same, by the way, for the financial services. We take out a couple of items within the financial services in close cooperation with Charlie to show that liberalization need to be exploited in the way that we have in mind. So, for example, payment cards, for example, retail banking, for example, insurance banking. So all those items can just be at the table to show that it really makes sense to have a European policy. By the way, and then coming back to the items that were put at the table as well from the business world, as well from the agency in France, we need to take into account that we badly need a better cooperation between universities and the business world, and that that is a main item. By the way, it all started with a mindset that has to be changed. It is not anymore the mindset that we used to have, but we need to be aware that time and circumstances has been changed, and that we should go for even more quality to attract what was touched upon, to attract real talent. For why should we have less intelligence compared to the Far East or compared to the United States? That's not true, but we should make it in a field and in under circumstances in which it is a challenge to stay in Europe and to come with real excellent universities. And there are excellent universities, but that are more specific in certain areas, telecommunication, whatever. There are a couple of sectors that we need to take into account for such a cooperation. When we are taking into account that it is outdated to talk about national champions, it is not done anymore, and what I mean with not done, it is outdated, so all those remarks that are made.
Would you talk about European champions?
I would prefer to talk about global champions that are located in Europe, but anyhow, there is not anymore a market in which you need to have a border or whatever. If we can perform, as well with our universities and with our flexible labor market, if we can perform in showing our retirement age, for example, that's not anymore a fixed item, because with our aging problems, we need to take into account that 51% of our population will be within a couple of decades above 65, and then I'm talking about the European population. So that means that 49% has to earn the money to give them a living, health, housing, and what have you. So we can't afford anymore to keep that line of the retirement age. By the way, it's also a challenge for if you are willing and able to take part in that type of activity, doing your job outside the family life, then I'm absolutely sure that, for example, women will be highly interested for, after having set up the family and taking into account that there are highly potential qualities within the women population, that they can do quite a bit of also activities outside the family. Just coming back to no limitations in ours, that's Austrian the business world too. And I think we need to have an open discussion on that and not being scared to touch upon types of that sensitive items. So also the retirement age, highly skilled working force, we need to take into account that there are possibilities and opportunities. And by the way, talking about my own portfolio, when we have in mind growth and jobs, and when Charlie is taking care of the internal market, but I'm sure that he will touch upon that one, then anyhow with the competition policy, we have the best instrument to make it working. So anyhow, competition policy is the instrument to show that fair competition for all those who are interested in a good climate for doing business, that is at the end of the day, even if it's sometimes tough, that is the answer on the question, is there a future for Europe? Yes, there is, and we have great challenges.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner McCreevy, two questions coming your way. First question would be, what fate do you envision for the Services Directive? Where are we going from here? And second question, from your feeling, and it's not, we're not playing the blame game, but from your opinion, is somebody in charge getting Europe ahead? Are too many people in charge? Too many people trying to play the blame game? What is your view on that?
Well, I was a politician for a long time, and the first rule in politics is to try and blame somebody else. You pass on the blame, but can I just say, I would be known as being very much for liberal economic thinking and for opening up markets, etc. But it has to be accepted that is not universally accepted among the populations of Europe or in all of the member states. So for those of us to believe in the opening of markets and liberal economic thinking, it is our job to convince enough people that in democratic societies that majority wins. The problems the politicians have to face are based on the democratic results of elections. we can have all the great theories and policies, but if not enough people come out to vote for your particular idea, then you're outside and someone else is in. And as someone who has banged the drum about liberal economics for a long time, I recognise that little bit of a problem. And that brings me to your question about the Services Directive, and Martin is the President of the Council at the moment. But we're going through the process. I didn't create the Services Directive. It came from the previous Commission. It is there. We have to wait now, firstly, the deliberations of the European Parliament in February. Then we'll have to take it from there. Then we have to get agreement with the Member States. We have to see what's going to be. Hopefully, at the end of the process, we'll have a realistic work file document. But we live in the democratic structure, and you must deal with the hand that you're given. Can I just say that I was struck when our Italian friend was speaking about the example of the vegetables anyway, and the other item I was struck is that you'll certainly probably starve in Europe, but you will be able to shave somewhere, I suppose, is the answer to it. But the problem is that I think internationalization or globalization, as referred to, has changed the whole game as far as Europe is concerned. If you step back a bit to the origins of the then common market 50 years ago, the idea was to have a common market in goods and in services. You'd be wondering why we need to have a services directive at all, because one of the foundational principles are that. And that meant, but not all of Europe, at the 6 started off, then there was 9, then there was 12, 15, and now 25. And the theory was to bring up everybody. But the big countries didn't have to compete with anybody else. So therefore, they always did pretty well. And as we said earlier, when you're a long time being the top dog, you get a little bit complacent. And now what has happened, the internationalization of business, I mean that the competition is from everywhere. And international capital will go to the places that will get the best return. Businesses don't set up generally, some maybe do, but certainly don't survive unless they make a profit in the long term. You have to make a profit in the long term. And you business people don't generally take on more employees unless there's going to be an adequate return in the longer term. Therefore, if in Europe the perception is that it's suffocated with red tape, regulation, and you get less of a return, then you will go to a place where you get a better return. And that is what the internationalization or globalization has done. Capital, I've often described it as follows. I've never seen water or river running up a mountain. Water usually flows to the point where it easily gets the best out. It will flow to the lowest point. And capital will set up and stay in places where it gets the best return. It may be a question of unit costs. It may be a question of a labour force. Yes, it may be a question of taxation policy, and not just business taxation, but all types of taxation. Yes, it may be a question of regulation. Yes, it may be the political environment, the security environment. They're all part of the things that make up a decision. So Europe has to realise that no one owes us a living. So unless we are prepared to take on that, and I espouse the way to do that is open up markets, take on board liberal economics, and have a good social security system at the same time. Logically, if you think about it, you should have liberal markets and high social security. You should have it that way, rather than a lot of the thinking in Europe is the opposite. But the difficulty is that you have to convince enough people that vote out there for Martin and his party if he wants to stay there. I'm now out of the Irish political system, so I don't have to think about that anymore. But I have to, when I was in the Irish government, extraordinary and good and brilliant as some of my ideas I thought were, I had to make sure that they got through by having a majority. And that is the fundamental problem, is to convince enough people in Europe, and most people in this room would subscribe generally to the things that this platform is saying. But in member states, the majority is not like that. So I just make that final point, and the ultimate must be believed. no government ever created a job. Governments do not create jobs. Business people, men and women, taking opportunities, making a fortune, and going bankrupt in other instances, that's what keeps the system going. And I espouse that type of thinking. And I think that for those of us to believe like that, well, we have the job of convincing more people to believe in it. Otherwise, it cannot be done in a democratic system.
Well, there seems to be quite a big common denominator here between business and politics, saying we have to change the mindset. If we don't change the mindset of our people, we're not going to change very much. Clara is going to offer a view on this one.
No, I want to ask a question,
please,
and, especially to Charlie and to Neelie. Because it is a question of pedagogy. If you want to see the spirit of the people changing, they have also to understand what are the rules, the European rules. You know, every morning or very often I go and take a coffee in the bar just near my house. And it is very difficult to understand for the owner of this restaurant why you, for example, Charlie, you are against the fact that there be an harmonization on the fiscal issues, and we are not allowed to cut down the tax added value on the restaurant. And that explains also the spirit of the fact that they can't understand what is the process, why France, for once a day, France wants to cut down the fiscality, and France is not allowed to do it. And on the other way, we try to explain to them that we have to make more liberalization of the market and so on. And they want to give more jobs, they want to have more employees, and they are not allowed to do it because of the fiscality. So there is a question of pedagogy. If you want people to change the spirit, you have also to explain to them why.
Who wants to take this? Sean?
As Internal Market Commissioner, I am not responsible for taxation. It's for my colleague, Mr. Kovacs. But as Finance Minister, I sat around for nearly 8 years and about this debate and this particular issue. The particular issue is the promise by President Chirac that the restaurateurs' VAT would be reduced. It was brought up by the ECOFIN again this week, and there was no agreement upon it. The reality is, when I was there as Finance Minister, and I want to go back now, is that there is an agreement, and there are rules and there are directives as to what is in the lower rates of VAT before a certain date, many, many years ago, stay within that particular box. And it can only be changed only by a question of unanimity of the 25. And these agreements on VAT are there for a long time. Some countries have zero VAT in some matters, but they had it back many years ago and were allowed to retain them. And that is the story. So the question is, that was what everybody signed up to, and it only be changed by unanimity. And the member states, it's not the Commission, it's the member states, and particularly one of the member states, will not agree to that particular matter. If there's unanimity in the Council, the Commission does not stand in its way. That's not a Commission problem. It's a Council of Ministers problem, and they haven't agreed.
That's not well too much.
I don't think that Sylvain, because it is his name, will understand that. What he will say, of course, we had a regulation we decided many years ago, but you want us to modernize. And you, in Ireland, you have been able to modernize because you have cut down your fiscality. And the day we want to cut down the fiscality in a job, we have a lot of unemployment, we are not allowed to do it. So it is a very simple question, and you can't give the answer. It is a question of member state and commission. And I think I just put that point because I think the question is that we have to be very close from the people. If we want to teach them the economic rules, we have also to answer to their economic rules.
Okay, I would just ask everybody not to dwell too much on the specific tax issue here.
But this is not the Commission's problem. That you have to convince the 24 other member states, and particularly Germany, who have blocked it. It is not the Commission. If the 25 unanimously agree, then it can be done. I speak ex cathedra on the subject.
Yes. We have Martin here, and then we have Mr. Bartenstein.
I find this desperately depressing. I really do. Whilst this reminds me of the debates that go on in mature companies that are faced with significant competitive threats, political debates lack of internal alignment, whatever. Whilst you're talking in this way, our lunch is being eaten by other people. And unless we recognize that, I mean, we've got two other systems. Let's talk about India and China for a minute. China, to my mind, is state-directed capitalism. Whether you think it's democratic enough or not, the realities of competitive activity, but no, whether I said, right, whether you believe it's democratic or not, right, it is a system that is extremely efficient and effective so far. Growth rates that we've not seen a phenomenon economically like China, unless you're 200 years old or so and go back to the beginning of the 19th century. The other issue is, India, if you look at the slogan around the Indian delegation, the fastest growing democracy in the world. A coalition with a communist element to it. When I was last in India, the West Bengali government was privatizing hotels and parts of its operation. I understand it's about politics. I understand it's about electorates. And I understand that governments want to be re-elected. But this is a highly competitive issue. And I come away listening to that debate being very depressed because I don't think that we will establish the will to deal with the competitive issues. And I worry deeply when I hear this sort of argument about the rate of VAT in restaurants as to whether that's really the thing that we should be worried about. Language was mentioned, I heard. Everybody in China is learning English. What is the greatest virtue that the Chinese have is that they listen. And if you go back to China every 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, there are miraculous changes because they listen and they implement. And unless we get our act together and get away from these sort of debates, it will be exactly the same as you see in industries. The analogy to companies, I think, is a perfect analogy. There's a sort of sclerotic tendency of big and successful companies to fail. I worry about that.
Please.
I get your worry, and now and then, so I believe in Europe, but now and then I have to fight to such a feeling as you are describing. Why? And then I'm coming back to the Service Directive, for example, and Charlie is doing his utmost. But it is nearby a fight uphill, for it is all about communication. For what are you talking of if you are talking about a Service Directive? By the way, if you are looking at the courts, the European courts in Luxembourg, they are already 30 years active in just taking their judgments exactly in the field of the Service Directive. So it is completely out of the mind. It is of a couple of people who are, in my opinion, not quite honest. And don't ask me to explain it, for I can explain it, are not honest and trying to use this type of items in their national political circumstances and fights. And then I think for the Service Directive is really important. And I'm willing and I'm able to discuss what's all about to put it in a scheme. And Charlie is much more able to do that, but it makes really sense if we could make a Service Directive. It is in line what we promised the people, and let's go step forward instead of fighting about things that you mentioned before. So let's take the real items that are
thank
at the
you.
table.
I was supposed to open the discussion to the forum like 15, 20 minutes ago, but I have such a lively podium up here that I didn't have the chance. If you want to contribute to the debate, please just raise your hand and state your name. And we still have Mr. Bartenstein, but may I ask you just to step back to give somebody from the floor the chance, and I will pass the word on to you. Please you, and then the mic goes to you, please. Sir, could you just state name and organization, please?
I'm Olivier Provost. I'm the editor-in-chief of the French daily La Tribune. It's a question for Mrs. Kroes, Mr. McCrevy, and perhaps a bit for Mrs. Gaymard. It's a bit sensitive, I'm sorry, but when you see a country like France decide that some areas of its economy may be forbidden to foreign investments, Do you think that's normal, as some other people have done in Europe, like Germany, or do you think that's a bad thing for the development of business in Europe?
Thank you. Who wants to take it?
It's a bad thing for Europe, and when we are really believing in one internal market, and I'm a great believer in that, then it is a win-win situation. No protectionism, no nationalism. It is short-term vision, and that's not in favor for Europe.
Do you want to comment on this? Okay, next question, please.
Prince Alexander, the Netherlands.
Just a second. Oh.
Maybe I can just answer to that question, because the question of this particular text concern the defense, and less than, I think, 1.5 of the GDP of our country. And when you look at the regulation made in United States or in UK, they are quite similar. And you know what the EU have said is that the decree has to change on some very small points. And I really believe that the idea of France is not to make protectionism. You know, we have just sold our shipyard, we have sold our motorway, we have sold for more.
Yeah. And are we allowed to give permission for Danone or whatever?
Yeah, you know, you see, we have today on the actuality. Starwood was bought the
No, I'm asking you a straightforward question. Danone.
Yeah, yes, you know, Danone, the Minister of Economy and Finance, Thierry Breton, has said very clearly, the only one who can do something for Danone is Mr. Franck Riboud. And he said it officially, so I think, you know...
your Prime Minister was making an explicit and very clear
Yes, but
statement.
afterwards he came back from that, and he just... that happens during the August month, and I think this story would have happened. You know, on the same week, Starwood bought the Groupe d'Étanger. We have sold our motorway to the Spanish and to the Australian. We have sold our shipyard to Norway, and today I had a meeting with Alcan, the Canadian, who bought Péchinet, and he is very happy of the business he has done in France, and he said it was much more easy than he believed it would be in France. So, you know, I think it's a bad idea you give about France by that, because we have sold 900 companies those last 5 years. We have been number 3 country for FDI behind United States and China those last 5 years. That is the figures. If it was impossible to buy a company in France, we wouldn't be number 3 worldwide for the FDI, because FDI is mainly merger and acquisition. That are the figures.
Okay. Now, just to get some order back, the Commissioner, one sentence, Mr. Bartenstein, and then your question, please.
I appreciate your explanation, and I believe you, no doubt about that. But take from me that one statement of your Prime Minister, even if it's corrected a week later, is disastrous for the national situation, for the European situation.
Give me one example of the company that was not able to be
Clara,
bought.
could you just let her finish the sentence,
Madame, I visit... No, okay, but there are a couple of examples in which the statement was made. By the way, it's not only France. Spain just recently, the Prime Minister did the same. And that is a disaster for the internal market of Europe. And that is what I'm bothering about. So even if it's corrected afterwards, it's a headline in international papers, and it's making a bad and negative point for our policy.
One sentence from you,
I don't want to interfere with this discussion between the Competition Commission and France. I could think of a few company names which have been in the newspapers lately, but okay, we take note that France is ready to also sell companies which are of great importance to the country.
Your question, please.
It's funny to see all this happening on the day that the world remembers 61 years after the liberation of Auschwitz, and the big success of Europe is that we have avoided war ever since. But this is for the future we're talking here, and everybody has points here. And in the meantime, we're being eaten by China and India. But I deal almost every day with very vocal very liberalized population, of which 90%, and I think I'm very conservative, does not even know the difference between the Council of Europe and the European Council. And that is exactly what Ms. Kroes said. It's the communication issue. You can go on talking like this all the time, but if you can't communicate it to the population of Europe, we're never going to get anywhere.
What do you propose?
Well, I mean, I'd like to see, well, how are you going to communicate this? Because that is the essential point where we're standing right now. And as long as you cannot communicate it, we're going to be eaten tomorrow, day after tomorrow, until there's nothing more to eat.
How can we communicate?
Well, European structures are pretty complicated, but first of all, the constitutional treaty, which failed in referenda in France and in the Netherlands, as we know, would provide certain mainstreaming and better structures, first of all. Second, I mean, with European Parliament getting stronger and stronger, I think we now can explain to also Americans, to Chinese, to Japanese, the structures of Europe. We are not a federal state. We are not the United States. Maybe not yet. Maybe we'll never get there. But I think you can explain that. Regarding China, I understand very well, very successful business people, and talking about China and India, and one should look there. I think opportunities there are much greater than the threats for us. A few Europeans think that way, but I do think that way. But it's difficult to compare the European Union with China. I mean, it's not a democracy. It's the total contrary. We'll see how that ends, but it's not a democracy. Let's see where they go in terms of energy, in terms of water supply, in terms of intellectual property rights. I mean, you're in a field where you're confronted with violations of IPRs very often, and I guess there, well, one talks about China quite quickly. But certainly, and one should also keep in mind that we come from countries with a per capita GDP of $30,000, $35,000, $40,000, or tell it in euros, whatever. China is at 1,200 or so. India is at less than that. So they have to catch up. We want them to catch up. And Europe is not that bad in terms of international competitiveness. Many companies have gotten much better over the last years. In terms of external trade, the European Union is world market leader. We have a world market share of some 19.7% according to the WTO figures. The US are at 17.4%.
The realities of running a company, whether it's listed or private, is that you are looking for stronger top-line growth. I mean, if you said, what is the key parameter for shareholder value? What are institutions interested in? What are investors interested in? They're interested in relative growth, not absolute growth.
Sure.
As I said, there are 5 $2 trillion economies in Western Europe, and there aren't 5 in Asia. The issue is rate of growth, and that's why investment will increasingly go to those areas. And when we do have an opportunity like Turkey to expand the EU, to try and deal with, and I know it's a very difficult issue, but to expand the population base with strong immigrant labor that will be a source of vitality, not to forget that they weigh into the tapping the Muslim world too, in a Muslim relationship. We reject that opportunity, or we delay it, or we try and avoid it.
We started accession negotiations on October 3rd.
Yeah, but how long is it going to last? When are they going to become a member?
Germany's against it.
This was a unanimous decision.
Yes.
Including Germany and Austria.
I hate to tell you that we ran out of time. We were supposed to run until 7:30. It was very interesting and quite lively, I must say, which is good because
so
we're not here to
we're not dead yet, Chris.
No, and we're not here to produce harmony, but to have a lively debate. I'm taking away one sentence which Charlie said: "No one owes us a living," and I think this could be the bottom line sentence for this discussion. Thank you for joining and thank you for taking part. Good evening.